Welcome to Philanthropy SA. This is a podcast about and for the philanthropic community in San Antonio and South Texas. We introduce organizations and people who are making an impact in the community. Beneficent Financial is proud to sponsor this podcast, and it is our hope that you enjoy this conversation about the impact we can have. The goal is to edify and inspire. Now please join our host, Dan Rebman.
Welcome to Philanthropy SA. I'm your host, Dan Rebman, and very pleased to be joined by my friend Bill Neely today. Bill, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
So this is the We're Married to People Named Cindy Club. So right. Bill and I's spouses are both named Cindy, and so we've gotten to have some fun with that. I know Bill through Social Venture Partners as well, but Bill's here today in his role as Executive Director of the San Antonio Community Resource Directory, and because that's a mouthful, they have a great acronym, SACRD.
That's right, SACRD without the E.
There you go. SACRD without the E. But we're going to talk about SACRD and all the great stuff going on there. And it is truly a great resource. So I look forward to introducing folks who don't know about it. And plenty of folks know what a tremendous resource it is. But first, I want to hear about you a little bit and what brought you to San Antonio.
Well, I kind of wound up here just by luck. I really didn't have any great plan. I grew up I was born in New Mexico. My dad was a farmer in New Mexico and moved to Houston with my mom when I was 8. Just kind of lived there and went to college at Baylor. I applied to one university, and it was Baylor University. And at the time, we were part of a Baptist church in Houston, and the pastor of the church was one of the regents at Baylor. And we used to joke that if you got a letter of recommendation from Dr. Cunningham, it was either just a yes or a no. There was no other narrative in the letter, but it was just kind of the default choice for me at that time, and went there, found it, studied computer science, and had never. I have to admit, I got really not great advice about any of this. I kind of lucked into a great situation in Baylor and did well at computer science, and wound up working for a big company here in San Antonio that nobody's ever heard of.
Very good. And so being at Baylor, rather than luck, they would probably have said divine intervention.
They might have said that, yes.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
we'll see if that holds true. But
well,
yeah.
I know enough to know that between SACRD and Social Venture Partners and your other stuff that San Antonio is definitely blessed.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
What we wanted to do, though, is also talk about, so you mentioned, being in the for-profit world. My question is, what made you, give that up to, because we know that executive directors are highly overpaid and underworked. Yeah, so
that's right. It's a real cash cow.
What caused you to decide this is that you wanted to get more involved on the nonprofit side?
Yeah, well, sure. It's it kind of happened in stages over time. I worked for this company for about 25 years, and did all sorts of things. Learned a great deal from working there. Both. I was a software developer, programmer for, ERP systems and things like that. And so learned a lot about how to do that, learned a lot about running a company, learned a lot about how companies run, learned a lot about business. And so I got a great education working at that company. But the last 7 or 8 years that I had worked there, they had assigned me to be a board member at a nonprofit. I'd done a couple of them, some volunteer work. They had community outreach and,
Sure.
Supporting the community. So they asked me to be a board member at a place called the Good Samaritan Center over on the west side. And I got involved there and wound up on the board for 6 years and ended my time there as the chair of the board. So, but in that period of time, I began to learn really how nonprofits work and how the social service sector, particularly human service area in San Antonio, which is what I'm interested in. I'm a nonprofit executive, but I'm really interested in human services. I'm not, the other types of nonprofits are not that interesting to me. Not to say that they're not important, just not where I spend my time.
Understood.
And so I was on the board there and working on helping them, navigate and with governance and doing that role, I began to see this trend that this organization had these problems that in my company would have been minor. I mean, easily solved with not that much money. Or staff that had the skills, readily available to be able to solve these problems. And this nonprofit doing this great work in, intervention in the lives of kids that, that didn't have many resources. And this organization couldn't solve those problems. They could not get the money. It's simple things. I need $5,000 for a piece of equipment, and that would take a year for them to figure out. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I wouldn't even have had to ask for permission to do that at my company. And so it just kind of began to strike me, why is that the case? And so I started doing a lot of reading and asking people about, how do they give to charity? When they make donations, who do they choose to give to? And trying to understand what motivates people to be generous with their time and money. Because in watching what was going on at Good Sam, it was clear to me that this place was working. It was having a tremendous impact on the kids that were there and the families that were there. Had been a central part of this neighborhood for 50 years. And I was just like, why don't people just pour money on this? Because this clearly works. And so I started asking why. Why don't you give money? And I heard a lot of reasons, and the bulk of it was that they just couldn't tell. Nobody spent. I didn't know before I was on the board there what great work they were doing, and so nobody knew what was going on in the community or how to evaluate the effectiveness of an organization. So I started doing reading about that and trying to figure out, how do you make the case for the effectiveness of an agency? And as a sidebar to that, I wound up reading this series of philosophers, Peter Singer, who I think was out of Princeton, but don't quote me on that, and William McCaskill, who was out of Oxford. And they had done a series of writings around something called effective altruism. And so you can read the books on your own, but the crux of it is if you want to be effective at doing something, then figure out what it is you care about, and then figure out what can I do with the skills that I have that can actually move the needle on this thing that I care about. So, for instance, if I care about, human life and I want to save human life, well, one of the things I could do is I could go and hand out, mosquito nets and prevent people from dying from malaria, right? But lots of people can do that, right? I have a particular skill set that maybe that's not the best use of my time. Maybe I can do something else. So that's the crux. What can you do that is most effective? So as time wore on with my company that I was working for, and I got to the end of my time with Good Sam, I decided, let me just stop working for the company. I didn't really want to do that work anymore. It was a great company, but not one that I wanted to be there. I'd been there for 25 years. It was time for me to move on. I started looking around, what can I do in San Antonio using my particular skill set, software development, understanding of business, that experience that I had, to impact the nonprofit world and human services in particular. So what can I do? So I started just casting around. My initial thought was I'll just go and work as a consultant and just solve those problems, the ones that I saw coming up at these agencies. I'll go in and provide a level of expertise and experience and project management, other things that they could normally not afford, and I'll just do it for what they can't afford. So that was my initial idea. I'll just work for really cheap, at a high level of expertise. That worked a little bit, but it wasn't. It just wasn't really moving the needle. It was helping those individual agencies that I did projects for. It helped them a lot, but it wasn't really, helping the whole community. So I started looking around for some other ideas. I had 3 or 4 ideas around what can I build, that will improve the efficiency and operation of every nonprofit in the city was my goal.
Well, that's a pretty modest goal.
Yeah. And so, assuming that, I had, like I said, I was looking for an idea, right? And so I had several, and I went and, just shopped them around, talked to several nonprofit leaders and community leaders, just asking, what do you think about this problem? And pretty much all of them said, that's great. It'll never work. And so, but I kept trying, I kept thinking. And anyway, I met somebody that worked for the city who turns out to be a SACRD co-founder. Her name is Ann Helmke. She works in the Department of Human Services. But she had been at Haven for Hope, and she'd been working in this kind of compassion movement for many, many years. And at Haven, she had this idea around, just resourcing, that everybody needs resources, and every organization does this, and nobody really does it that well. And then her job at the city of San Antonio was to create collaboratives between nonprofits, government, and faith communities that are all involved in human service. She worked out of the Department of Human Service. And so her job is to create collaborations between those organizations to improve the delivery of service. So I started working for her through the AmeriCorps Vista program for I was there for about a year and a half. And we started doing these community sessions, bringing people together. And from nonprofit, government, and faith, and asking, do you all want to work together? And everyone says yes. We need each other. We know we need each other. So then the next question is, well, you're all here in this room today. Why don't you? And the answer was, we can't find each other, right? So, if faith community is operating a food pantry and they discover that somebody needs dental assistance, but they don't know how to do that. They don't have that resource. And there's great volunteers working hard, but they don't know where every resource is in the city. Vice versa, programs that are being operated by the city, are providing a great service, Head Start, other, senior centers, things like that. But some of those can be very transactional, right? I need service X, I go and I get service X and I leave. But what I really need is somebody to call me on the weekends and check in on me periodically. And, as an older adult, maybe make sure that I'm, going outside and that I have food. So those are relationship skills. Those come typically from faith communities, right? Or from small neighborhood-based nonprofits. But there was no connection between them. There was no way for them to find each other. So we went around to we had a list of about 100 organizations, about 100 nonprofits. Anne had built some contact information from faith communities. She had a list of about 1,000 churches and mosques, synagogues in San Antonio that mostly turned out to be good. And we just started contacting them and asking, what do you know? Tell us everything you know about services in your community. And so we collected about 100 yellow pads worth of information and started categorizing it and put it all online, and that was SACRD.
That's it.
So that was really how I got there. I was really, left a job I didn't want, was looking for something a little entrepreneurial where, honestly, where I didn't have to go to an office every day. That was also part of the deal. And then, just something that would use my particular skill, and here we are. So, and 5 years later, it seems to have caught on. So I think we got it mostly right. The service is being used and seems to be well regarded in the city. Yeah,
talk about the growth of SACRD. So you started out with that list of stuff, and then how many organizations are in the database at SACRD now?
Yeah, well, as like every good scrappy startup, we've always described it as being bigger than it was. So, but now it's legitimately big. So we put the first service online in 2018. Where really we had maybe 300 programs, mostly food pantries that we had identified. A couple of counseling services, some grief programs, and just whatever we could get our hands on. Maybe 400 that we started with, and we started showing it to people in 2018, and it really caught on. People seemed to really appreciate the idea, and so we took a brief pause just for some legal issues, and nobody sued me, but I was, organizing companies and things like that.
Sure.
And so, but we organized as a 501c3 in right at the beginning of 2019, and really started at that point really actively putting resources into the directory and really trying to get out in the community and tell people about it. And so, in March of 2019, we had 0 users on the website. Last week, we had 11,000 visits on the website, and that's been pretty consistent for the last several years, running at that kind of 11 to 12,000. It has actually, in the last 2 months, really March and April and May of 2025, has taken a little bit of a dip, and we think it's primarily due to there's been a lot of layoffs in the nonprofit sector. And a lot of dollars that have exited San Antonio as a result of the funding situation. And so we've seen that in our numbers. I don't think the need has gone away, but I think the people that were using SACRD to help clients and to help their neighbors are no longer employed doing that. And I think that we've seen that in our numbers. But we're running at about 11,000 visits a week. A lot of people that use SACRD are they're case managers, social workers, faith community volunteers. These are people that use SACRD as part of their work. And so they're using SACRD to help an individual multiple times a week. So, the average SACRD user might be a case manager that uses SACRD 5-6 times a week. There are some people out there using SACRD 5-6 times a day for different clients. And but it's probably 70% of usage is this professional user.
But it is not exclusively for those kind of folks, right?
No.
I mean, if you have a neighbor who has a need, anybody can go to the SACRD website.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the, if there was secret sauce, if I don't know that there is, but if there was, it would be that we built SACRD to be useful by the individual themselves. So if Bill Neely needs to find a food pantry, somebody that can help check in on my grandma while I'm out of town, or take my mother to a doctor's appointment while I'm at work. If I need that as an individual, I can use SACRD to find that. It's built for the person that needs help finding assistance. So because we built it for that person, it's easy for a navigator to use it, but it was really ultimately built for that individual. And it's all proximity based. So you go in and you put in your location, what zip code are you in, what are you looking for, and then you find things that are close by where you live, work, by your school, whatever your location is. So it's really easy to use, really tailored towards the individual, and it's completely anonymous. You don't have to log in. You don't have to give an email address. You don't have to tell me anything about yourself. You just log in, put in the keywords that you want to find, and search. So it's really low friction, built for the individual. And so I think that's why it's been adopted so widely.
Yeah, no, I can attest to the fact that it's a very user-friendly site. One of the things that I appreciate is when people are looking for it. If they just punch in San Antonio Community Resource Directory or SACRD, SACRD, they're going to get directed to the site. But what I like best is they're coming to your homepage to do a search. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're getting a bunch of information about the organization and then the search page is on a different, I mean, it's right there. So the purpose of the page when you get there.
Yeah, we want to make it as quick and easy to search, as low friction as possible to get in and find what you look for. Yes. And also, kind of non-threatening. I mean, being anonymous is a really important component of the site, I think.
Sure.
And it works on every platform too. I mean, you have a tablet, that's your employer gave you. It works great there. If you've got, 5-year-old Android phone with a cracked screen, it works there too.
So you're saying you don't require the latest iOS?
We do not require the latest anything for it to work. So that's really intended. Like we said, we wrote it for the individual that needs help. And so we want to make it as accessible as possible.
So what is the URL for that? Where do people go to find
SACRD.org, SACRD.org. So San Antonio Community Resource Directory, but it's shortened nicely down to SACRD.org.
SACRD.org. That's a good note for us to stop and take a break and hear from our sponsor. We'll be right back.
Many of you out there care deeply about wanting to make an impact on the world around you. You want to help take care of the people and organizations that are important to you. We understand that because we feel the same way. Beneficent Financial wants to help you. Our mission is to help people like you with professional, individualized financial advice achieve their objectives. Whether your financial legacy will stay within your family or benefit the community at large, we are able to help. Call Beneficent Financial today at 210-999-5511. In addition to traditional wealth management, we offer philanthropic services such as direct donations of required minimum distributions, donor-advised funds, and foundations. Call 210-999-5511 or go online to beneficentfinancial.net. Let us help you do well so you can do good. Securities offered through Momentum Independent Network, member SIPC/FINRA.
Thanks for joining us today on Philanthropy SA. I'm your host, Dan Redman, and I have Bill Neely, who's the Executive Director of the San Antonio Community Resource Directory, or as we've been referring to it, SACRD here. And so SACRD helps connect organizations or help connect people with organizations that can provide them assistance. If an organization provides these kind of services and goes on your site and doesn't see themselves, what's the way for them to contact you and get their resources made available to the public?
Sure. It's really easy to do. There's a link right at the top of the page called What Are We Missing? And so if you know of something that should be on SACRD, you can just fill out that form and it goes into the queue for our resource investigators. And it'll be added. Usually beyond just reporting new stuff, there's also a whole crowdsourcing component on the site. So if you find something on the site that you think is incorrect or maybe hasn't been updated properly, then you can report that through the site as well. And so we get 4 or 5 of those a day, just people telling us something has changed. My organization changed the operating hours, or I called this phone number and they're not there anymore. And so we get those, and usually takes us about a day, maybe day and a half, to kind of vet that information and then put it on the site. We have a team of resource investigators. So while we ask for help from the organizations and from the community to help us keep the information up to date, ultimately it's up to us. So we have a staff of resource investigators whose job it is to review everything on the site every year. And so they're assigned a list of research targets every week. Usually starting with the oldest ones, the ones that haven't been reviewed for the longest time. They go through, they do a process, they look up the website, they check the Facebook page if it's there, make sure that somebody's still posting, call the phone number, make sure the phone still rings so that the person that answers on the other end knows what this program is, right? And so we do kind of a quick check on anything that's listed on the site at least once a year. And right now we're actually running a little faster than that. We're getting through the whole cycle of 11,000 programs currently on the site. At about a pace of about 7.5 months is what it's taking us right now to get through that. That ebbs and flows, just as the year goes. But we really take it as our responsibility to make sure that information is up to date. We look for help from the community through these crowdsourcing features that are built into the site. But ultimately, it's SACRD's job to make sure that the information is up to date. If it's not up to date, nobody's going to use it, right?
Sure.
If they can't. And it's transparent right on the site. If we've updated this in the last week, it'll say so on the site. If it's been 6 months, it'll say so on the site.
Very good. So dealing with all these organizations, and then, of course, knowing your involvement with social venture partners and that type of thing, you kind of have a good view of the nonprofit, philanthropic, altruistic ecosystem, if you will. And so I'm curious, as you're looking out across that, what are some of the trends that you're seeing right now? What are the things that either concern you or you want to applaud or that type of thing?
Well, one of the things I think that makes me really feel proud of our community is that there's 11,000 programs listed on SACRD, and some organizations are very large. Think the food bank. The San Antonio Food Bank is a very large organization. Family Service is a very large organization, CHES. But the real strength in our community doesn't come from the number one, number two, the big players. They do tremendous work, and we need them in our community. But the real power of this community comes from the long tail of services. The organizations that have one program, a faith community that's serving 10 families within a 6-block radius of their building, small nonprofit that's got 2 peer counselors to help women that are escaping domestic violence. These are small agencies helping 10, 15, 20 people a year, and doing it out of just devotion to their neighbors. And there are thousands of those. And so, so sometimes we look and we say, well, Catholic Charities should do all the work. Well, Catholic Charities does a lot of work, right? But the Catholics in the parishes are doing a lot of work too, right? And just that individual that started a nonprofit or went to work for a small program because it was an area that they thought that they could make a difference. That is going on over and over and over again in San Antonio, and is just this tremendous asset to our community, and is helping thousands and thousands of people. 11,000 visits on the site a week. You do some math. I mean, it's not hard to site's completely anonymous, so we don't actually track individuals, but it's not hard to get to an estimate, a reliable estimate, that 250, 300,000 people are getting some benefit out of SACRD every year. Most of that is coming from these small agencies. Not all of it, but most of it is coming from these small agencies. And a lot of these agencies are being run by people that have another job. So they're doing this on the weekends and in the evenings, or maybe they work part-time, not getting paid for the nonprofit work or getting paid very little. Or in the case of many of the faith communities that are doing this work, the community itself is paying for the service. So, the grief counselor that's at the church, that's free of charge, being paid for by the members of the faith community. So that's a huge asset that is maybe not that well recognized. One thing we can also do on SACRD is that we can identify businesses that have a compassionate component to them, right? So in some areas of SACRD, mental health in particular, a lot of those service providers are for-profit, independent counselors running a small practice. Those are for-profit providers, but they can be in SACRD because they're offering some kind of service. As long as they have some kind of accessible component, I take insurance, I have sliding scale billing, something like that, then you can be in SACRD. So we can include those businesses as well, which often not everything has to be done by a nonprofit. Not everything has to be done by the government. Some things can just be done by the community and but done in a way that's accessible and compassionate to their neighbors.
Yeah, I think the important phrase there is, resource directory. Mm-hmm. If you're a resource, then it doesn't matter, whether or not at the end of the day, the nature of how that resource is being provided. Yeah. Although I'm sure, like you said, on the for-profit side, you want to see that folks know that up front, and then also, whether there's going to be costs involved with services.
Yeah,
and that type of thing.
It's not a business directory, but there are businesses that are included, and they should be, because they're often part of that compassionate landscape. And not everything on SACRD is free. Most things are, but not everything is free. And but that's okay. One of the things that we do as well is one of the really powerful components of SACRD is we talk about the taxonomy, right? Which is just a fancy word for categories. But we've got this 140 or so categories that we use that kind of define, food, health, goods and services, education, transportation, legal needs. Then there's categories underneath all of those. But in areas of, and we call that SACRD General, but in areas of real kind of specific need, we're able to add these additional attributes that we can track for specific programs. So like in the case of mental health, we're able to build this. We've built this mental health portal, we call it, and we've, in addition to, the standard taxonomy, I need a ride, I need a fan, whatever. And mental health is a very complex service area. So we go through, and we went through a process with the mental health professionals in the community and with mental health service providers. We got them to describe their services and what their patients are looking for, and we developed specifically a set of attributes around mental health programs, what we call the mental health portal taxonomy. And this is about another 100 or so mental health specific services and attributes that we then go and assign to the mental health program. So it's things like what diagnoses are being treated, what are the payment options, what are the languages that the organization is providing services into, what age groups are they meeting, what are the certifications that the organization has, right? And so we're able to identify all of those things, and then just for the mental health programs, we can assign those attributes to the program. And then we can provide a guided search just on mental health. So you can come in and say, my son has become withdrawn and isn't enjoying the things that he used to enjoy, doesn't talk to his friends anymore. I'm worried about him. I want to talk to somebody in the 78253 zip code, that takes Medicaid, right? And you can come into SACRD and put in that specific search and find somebody. And even go one step further, where we've added a feature on the mental health portal where we're tracking the demographics of the providers in the agency, so that we can say, so that you can come one step further and say, maybe I'm a veteran and I have PTSD symptoms and I want to talk to a female veteran. You can find that on SACRD. Or maybe I want to talk to a Black woman veteran. I can find that on SACRD, by putting in those attributes and then describing my situation. It'll help me find a mental health professional that will do that. We've done that for mental health. We've done that for housing services. So, I'm a renter and I just moved to a place and I need help with finding furniture and small items for my kitchen. Or maybe I need help with, I've inherited a house and I need help on, understanding, nobody has the deeds. My mom told me my grandma left it to me in her will and I can't prove it, right? So how can I find help to do those? So we've done, mental health, we've done this housing services. We're working on several new portals now around older adult services, substance use, and one I'm really excited about, which is it's going to be, we haven't named it yet, but it's going to be around IDD, intellectual developmental disabilities, special needs and other disability support, trying to identify the services that are providing support to the people in those communities. And one of the things I'm really excited about there is that we think we'll be able to really expand the way that we're including small business by identifying organizations that have developed some level of accessibility in their practice. So think of a barber that has put somebody on staff that knows how to cut hair for young men with autism, right, that don't like to be touched, right? Mm-hmm. Or, an organization that has really gone out of their way to create a space that's really accessible to wheelchairs or people that are mobility limited. So, I think I'm really excited about that component, because I think it's going to help us reach into not just what we think of in traditional need, but we all have needs, right? I mean, if I have a disability that limits my mobility, I just need, I don't need a lot of help, but a flat floor and no stairs would be nice,
yeah.
Right? Or something that's not on an angle on the sidewalk in front of your building. So And if we can help identify those types of things, I think that'll be something. We've done a lot of unique things. I think that's going to be a really unique thing that SACRD is going to be able to do.
No, I think the more detail you can get that way, the better. Yeah. It's going to help people make choices of where they're going to go. So what's something that we didn't talk about today that you wanted to make sure that we touched on?
Well, I think we covered a lot. I mean, I think the one thing I can leave with is SACRD, in addition to being a place where somebody can come and find an organization that can offer assistance for their need. As part of that, we're developing – every time you look at SACRD, every page view on SACRD consists of, I'm in this part of town, this is my zip code, and I looked for help with this type of need. So we can kind of infer that from the couple of million page views that we get on SACRD every year. And from that, we're collecting and trying to build this really detailed database of what does the need look like in San Antonio and where are the resources that can provide that. So we'll be able to take overlays to say in this part of town – the top 3 searches are going to be, help with paying for medication and transportation and medical appointments. Over here in this part of town, it's childcare, and in this part of town, maybe it's food. Food and housing are always the number 1 and number 2 searches on SACRD and have been from the beginning. But it goes, but that long tail of need goes, and so because we have everybody in town, 200,000-300,000 people that are using the service, it creates this single platform where we can then create this database and this data set that will help us understand, okay, where in the city is the need and where are the resources that are being provided at. And from that, we can then use that to help inform funders, philanthropists, organizations that are looking to develop new programs, policy makers in our city and our county, people that have the resources to really, impact the need and the service availability in different parts of our community. And we can help guide that, I think. And so we're working on that actively. And so, stay tuned. We're going to be doing something there real soon.
Well, I know you're not resting on your laurels, constantly making it better. And we've heard about a couple of those things today. So if you haven't checked out SACRD, I hope you will. SACRD.org. That's the San Antonio Community Resource Directory. It's available to support anyone. If you need something, go on there and check it out. If you know somebody who needs something, do the same. And then, of course, if you're a provider in that space, just go look and make sure that you're in there.
Make sure you're in there. And I think if you are interested just to know what's going on in your neighborhood, just go put in your zip code and look to see what's going on. You'd be amazed. You might think your neighborhood doesn't have a lot of resources. Look at SACRD. You'll find something within a mile from your house probably. That's somebody that's doing some great work to help people in your community.
Earlier, Bill, you had talked about, what makes San Antonio great, and it's all those organizations and people that are doing those great things. Yeah. So on behalf of Philanthropy SA, this is Dan Redman reminding you to do well so you can do good.
Thank you for joining us at Philanthropy SA. We hope you found something to inspire you during today's conversation. If you know organizations and people who are making an impact in the community, we would love to hear about it. Until next time, do well so you can do good.